The California sun blazed mercilessly as Augustus Gus Whitmore crawled through the chaparral, his back broken and twisted from the fall, his prospector's tools scattered across the rocky slope behind him. At 56, the former geology professor had mapped mineral deposits across 3 territories, discovered 2 major silver veins, and spent 15 years bringing scientific method to the chaos of frontier mining. But he'd never expected to be pushed off a cliff by his own mining partners, betrayed for the crime of refusing to falsify assay reports that would defraud innocent investors. "You're too honest for this business, Professor," Jake Murdoch had sneered as his gang forced Gus toward the precipice. "This territory's got no use for geologists who can't tell the difference between science and profit." The profit had been Murdoch's scheme to salt worthless claims with imported ore, selling shares to Eastern investors based on Gus's falsified reports. When Gus discovered the fraud and threatened to expose it, Murdoch had decided that a tragic mining accident would solve his problem permanently. "Should have stuck to teaching rocks instead of teaching morals," Murdoch had laughed as they shoved Gus over the edge. "Maybe the buzzards will appreciate your scientific integrity." Now Gus dragged himself through the manzanita and scrub oak, his legs useless below the waist, his vision blurred from pain and the merciless heat. Each movement sent shards of agony through his spine, but the alternative was death under the unforgiving sun. His professor's hands, once steady with a microscope or geological hammer, were now torn and bleeding from clutching at rocks and roots to pull himself forward. In the distance, he spotted smoke rising from a hidden canyon, the first sign of civilization he'd seen since crawling away from the base of the cliff. The journey took hours. Each yard gained a victory against pain and despair. Twice he passed out, waking to find the sun had moved across the sky while he lay unconscious. His throat burned with thirst, his lips cracked and bleeding. The geological expedition that had begun with such promise 3 months ago now seemed like a distant dream from another life. The cabin sat beside a natural spring, surrounded by fruit trees and a well-tended garden that seemed impossible in this harsh landscape. Water trickled over moss-covered stones, creating an oasis of green amid the dusty browns and reds of the California wilderness. Gus collapsed at the garden gate, his blood staining the carefully tended soil. The woman working among the tomato plants looked up at his approach, small and wiry, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, her hands stained with earth and honest work. She wore a simple dress covered by a canvas apron, and her hazel eyes held the calm competence of someone who'd learned to make miracles from nothing. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, dropping her basket and rushing to his side. "What happened to you?" "Pushed," Gus gasped through gritted teeth. "Off a cliff. My partners tried to kill me." The woman, he'd later learn her name was Patience Patty Goodwin, helped him toward her cabin with surprising strength for someone so small. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, the actions of someone accustomed to handling emergencies alone. The cabin's interior was cool and dim after the harsh sunlight, smelling of dried herbs and fresh-baked bread. Her home was modest but immaculate, with shelves lined with preserved foods and medicinal herbs that spoke of someone who planned for every contingency. "Your own partners did this?" she asked, examining his injuries with hands that moved with gentle precision. She cut away his torn shirt, revealing the bruised and twisted flesh beneath. "Caught them. Salting claims. Didn't appreciate my interference." Each word was an effort, but Gus felt compelled to explain, to make someone understand the betrayal that had brought him here. Patty's expression darkened with recognition. She'd seen this kind of betrayal before, trusted colleagues turning deadly when money and greed overcame conscience. "Wicked men," she said quietly. "The love of money truly is the root of all evil." She worked methodically, cleaning his wounds with water from the spring, applying poultices of herbs that numbed the pain and reduced the swelling. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had treated serious injuries before, though she made no claim to formal medical training. "You'll need a doctor eventually," she told him, "but there's none within 50 miles, and you're in no condition to travel. We'll have to make do with what I know." For 6 weeks, Gus lay paralyzed while Patty tended his wounds with a mixture of frontier medicine and herbal remedies she'd learned from necessity. The first days passed in a haze of pain and fever, his body fighting to heal from injuries that would have killed most men. Patty stayed by his side, changing bandages, administering tinctures and teas that eased his suffering, reading to him from her small collection of scientific journals when consciousness returned. Her touch was gentle but sure, and she worked with the patient faith of someone who believed healing came from God's grace as much as human skill. "The body knows how to heal itself," she explained when he asked about her methods. "My job is just to give it the tools and time it needs." As his strength returned, Gus learned more about his rescuer. Patty spoke little of herself at first, deflecting personal questions with practical concerns about his recovery. But in the quiet evenings, as she worked by lamplight, her story emerged in fragments. When Gus finally regained some feeling in his legs, he found Patty working at a small laboratory she'd set up in her kitchen, testing soil samples and plant extracts with equipment that seemed impossibly sophisticated for such a remote location. A microscope sat beside glass beakers and carefully labeled specimen jars, while botanical drawings covered one wall with meticulous detail. "You're a scientist," he observed, watching her work with precise measurements and careful notation. The realization surprised him. Women in scientific fields were rare enough in university settings, let alone in this wilderness. "I'm a botanist," Patty replied, not looking up from her microscope. "Or was, before my husband died and left me with nothing but debts and this worthless land." Her story emerged slowly over the following days. Patty had been married to a fellow professor who'd brought her west to study desert plant adaptation, only to lose everything when his research funding was cut and creditors seized their assets. After his death from consumption, she'd retreated to this hidden canyon and discovered that her worthless land contained rare medicinal plants worth more than gold to the right buyers. "The university wouldn't hire me after Charles died," she explained, her voice matter of fact rather than bitter. "Said a widow should find a new husband, not continue her husband's research. So I came here, where no one could tell me what I could or couldn't study." "Men think a widow can't understand science," she explained, organizing her specimens with scientific precision. "They're wrong. We understand survival better than most. We've had to learn everything ourselves." As his strength returned, Gus began to assist with her research, his geological knowledge complementing her botanical expertise. Together, they mapped the canyon's unique ecosystem, identifying mineral deposits that explained why certain rare plants thrived in this harsh environment. Gus told her about Murdoch's conspiracy, the salted claims, the years of honest research repaid with treachery. He described the elaborate fraud, how Murdoch had imported high-grade ore from established mines, planting it in worthless claims to create the illusion of rich deposits. When assayed, these samples would show remarkable mineral content, attracting investors who didn't realize they were buying shares in barren rock. Patty listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she'd heard similar stories before. Her own experiences with academic politics had taught her how quickly principles could be abandoned when money and reputation were at stake. "This Jake Murdoch," she said finally, setting aside her notes. "He thinks fraud is easier than honest work. He thinks I'm a fool for believing in scientific integrity, too naive to understand that geology is just another way to separate fools from their money." Gus shifted uncomfortably on his makeshift bed, the memory of betrayal still raw. Maybe he's right. Maybe integrity has no place in the territories. "Maybe he's right about one thing," Patty said, her tone thoughtful. "Maybe the old way of doing science is finished. Question is, what are you going to discover to replace it?" The question lingered between them, challenging Gus to look beyond his injuries to the possibilities that remained. His academic career was over. No university would hire a crippled geologist who'd accused prominent businessmen of fraud. But perhaps there were other ways to use his knowledge, other contributions he could make. Their partnership began when a group of desperate miners arrived seeking help with a claim that had mysteriously stopped producing ore. The men had heard rumors of a scientist living in the hidden canyon, though they seemed surprised to find a woman and a crippled man rather than the expert they'd expected. "Our vein just disappeared," explained the lead miner, a weathered man named Harkins. "One day we're pulling out good color. Next day nothing but worthless rock. Company geologist says the vein's played out, but my gut says different." Gus examined their samples, while Patty tested the surrounding soil. Together, they identified a geological fault that had shifted the ore body, explaining why the miners had lost their vein. More importantly, Gus's geological knowledge, combined with Patty's understanding of soil chemistry, allowed them to discover that the mine had been deliberately sabotaged by competitors who wanted to buy it cheap. "Someone's been introducing chemicals into your groundwater," Patty explained, showing them the results of her tests. "Makes your assays read negative even when there's gold present. Clever trick, and completely dishonest." With their guidance, the miners were able to locate the shifted vein and resume operations, while taking legal action against the saboteurs. Their gratitude took the form of a generous payment and word-of-mouth advertising that brought other miners with similar problems. "You still know your science," Patty observed as they watched the miners celebrate their restored fortune. "No rocks, no minerals, know how to read the signs when something doesn't add up," Gus replied, struggling to stand with the help of the crutches Patty had made for him. "Out here, that's still worth something." Word spread through the California mining country about the cabin in the hidden canyon, where Patty Goodwin and the crippled geologist could solve problems that had stumped territorial experts for years. Miners with disputed claims, prospectors seeking honest assays, even territorial officials investigating fraud, all found their way to the remote laboratory where science was practiced with integrity and precision. They developed a reputation for honesty that extended from the Sierra Nevada to the Mojave Desert. Unlike the company geologists who told mine owners what they wanted to hear, or the territorial assayers who could be bribed to falsify reports, Gus and Patty offered unvarnished truth, backed by scientific method. "We can't promise you'll like what we find," became their standard warning to new clients. "We can only promise it will be accurate." More importantly, they found in each other something they'd both thought lost: intellectual companionship, shared purpose, and the slow-burning warmth of mature love built on mutual respect and common interests. Their relationship evolved naturally from professional collaboration to deeper partnership, neither of them feeling the need to formalize what they both recognized as a perfect meeting of minds and hearts. The confrontation with Jake Murdoch came 2 years later. He arrived with territorial mining officials and forged documents, claiming Gus was mentally incompetent due to his injuries and needed to be placed under Murdoch's care as his former business partner. His real motive was transparent. Gus and Patty's honest assays were threatening his fraudulent operations, exposing the worthless claims he continued to sell to unsuspecting investors. "There's the old cripple," Murdoch announced, pointing at his former colleague. "Living in isolation with some crazy plant lady, probably doesn't even remember the difference between granite and sandstone anymore." Gus emerged from the cabin, no longer the broken man Murdoch had pushed off the cliff. Hard work and purpose had strengthened his upper body, while finding his true calling had restored his spirit. He moved on crutches, but his mind was sharp and his voice strong. "Jake," he said calmly, "you're looking prosperous. The fraud business treating you well?" "Don't get smart with me, Professor. I'm here on official territorial business." Murdoch waved his forged documents. "These papers say you're not competent to manage your own affairs. I'm taking you back to civilization where you can get proper care." "Official?" Patty stepped out beside Gus, a rifle cradled in her arms. "Funny thing about that, I sent some letters to friends at the University of California and the Geological Survey. Seems the federal government's been investigating your mining operations." Murdoch's confidence wavered as he realized they'd been building a case against him for months. Patty's connections in the scientific community had provided access to records and expert testimony that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. The honest assays they'd performed for legitimate miners had created a database of mineral deposits throughout the territory, evidence that clearly showed which claims were genuine and which were salted. "This is a setup," Murdoch sputtered, his hand moving toward his gun. "No," came a new voice from the canyon entrance. "This is justice." A federal marshal rode into the hidden valley, flanked by territorial investigators and several angry investors who'd lost fortunes to Murdoch's salted claims. They'd been tracking the conspiracy for over a year, following a trail of fraudulent assays and worthless stock certificates across 3 states. "Jake Murdoch," the marshal announced formally, "you're under arrest for mail fraud, securities fraud, and attempted murder of Augustus Whitmore." The confrontation ended without violence. Faced with overwhelming evidence and expert testimony, Murdoch's operation collapsed like a house of cards. His partners turned against him, each trying to save themselves by providing evidence against the others. He died in federal prison 5 years later, still claiming he'd only been trying to develop the territory's mineral wealth. "Feel better?" Patty asked as they watched the marshal's party disappear up the canyon trail, Murdoch in handcuffs among them. "Feel productive," Gus replied, adjusting his crutches. "For the first time since they crippled me, I feel like I'm doing real science again." Their partnership deepened into something more profound than business or convenience. They established a research station that served the entire mining industry, providing honest assays, geological surveys, and botanical studies that helped legitimate miners while exposing fraudulent operations. Their methods combined traditional geology with Patty's innovative botanical indicators, certain plants that thrived in soil containing specific minerals, providing natural markers for prospectors. The territorial governor, impressed by their contributions to honest mining, provided funding for expanded facilities. The University of California, belatedly recognizing Patty's scientific contributions, offered her a research position she could fulfill from the Canyon Laboratory. Together, they trained a new generation of geologists and botanists who understood that science served truth rather than profit. "We make quite a team," Patty observed one evening as they sat in their garden, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in brilliant oranges and purples. The years had been kind to them both, bringing recognition, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. "We make a discovery," Gus corrected, taking her earth-stained hand in his scarred one. "The kind that's built on truth rather than deception, on knowledge rather than greed." At 58, Augustus Whitmore was no longer the broken-down professor who'd been pushed off a cliff by corrupt partners. He was a researcher, a protector of scientific integrity, and living proof that knowledge was more valuable than gold when applied with honesty and purpose. The canyon that had sheltered his broken body had also given him purpose, partnership, and the chance to use his expertise for something greater than mere profit. His scientific papers, co-authored with Patty, were changing how geology was practiced throughout the West, introducing rigorous methodology to a field often dominated by hucksters and get-rich-quick schemes. And Patience Goodwin had found something she'd thought lost when her husband died. Not just love, but intellectual partnership with someone who saw her scientific mind as an asset rather than an oddity, who understood that the greatest discoveries came from patient observation and careful analysis. Her botanical research, once dismissed as a widow's hobby, now informed agricultural practices throughout California's challenging climate. Together, they'd carved out their own piece of the American dream in the hidden beauty of the California mountains, proving that sometimes the people society discards become the ones who make the most important contributions to human knowledge. Their research station became a beacon of integrity in the mining industry, Dead Man's Gulch Laboratory, where honest science and careful methodology went hand in hand. The gold rush continued to bring fortune seekers to California, but now some of them came seeking something more valuable than precious metals: the truth about what lay beneath the earth, discovered by 2 people who'd learned that the greatest treasures are found not in the ground, but in the partnership between minds that refuse to compromise their principles for profit.